we in Suffolk County live in a county that was one of the 12 original counties of the state of New York, formed in 1683. And of the original 12 counties, only 2 have never been subdivided. One being Suffolk County, and the other, being Richmond County or Staten Island. Its Staten Island name, of course, is Dutch, and Richmond is named for one of the illegitimate children of Charles II of England, who probably had half the English population as illegitimate children in his day. Charles II gave to his brother, James, the Duke of York, the right to all the property outside of New England in the northeast quadrant of the United States to do with whatever he wanted to do. James, who was also the Duke of Albany, has given his name to both Albany, state capital, and also to New York State and New York City, because he was, as I said, the Duke of York. And in 1666, James brought over to the New World through one of his right-hand men, Colonel Richard Nichols, a troop of ships who conquered New Netherlands from the Dutch. Now, the Dutch arrived in New Netherlands in 1626, as you know, and Peter Manoury gave $24 or so, we're told, to buy the land from the Manhattan Indians in what is now Manhattan. And the Dutch settled in and have left any number of place names in the New York City area and the Nassau County area. The international boundary line in 1666, prior to the taking by Richard Nichols, was basically around Walt Whitman Road in Huntington today. And that area in Nassau County today was the easterly end of Queens County, which was named for Charles II's wife, whose maiden name was Braganza, and who was the daughter of the King of Portugal. And so she gave her name to Queens County. In 1898, when the election was held as to whether or not New York City should expand beyond Manhattan and the Bronx to include Richmond and Queens and Kings counties, the western end of Queens County and Newtown, Jamaica, and Flushing voted to join New York City, while the easterly towns of Queens County, Oyster Bay, Hempstead, and North Hempstead refused to join Queens County and voted no, and formed their own county of Nassau, which they named after the Princes of Orange, the house name, the family name of the royal family of Holland. Except for when in 1673 the Dutch took back Manhattan from the English for 1 year, the Dutch, as rulers of New York, have disappeared from history. Suffolk County was originally called the Riding of East Yorkshire, and it, as I said, ran from the basic boundary line today between Nassau and Suffolk counties. And in 1683, the King of England, Charles II, through his brother, the Duke of York, set up the province of New York. And the province of New York, as I said, was divided into 12 counties. And then the different counties in the state of New York, many were evolved, as you know, into the present 62 counties in the state of New York we have today, formed town governments. And the towns were chartered by the state of New York. And one of those towns was the town of Islip. Now, the history of the town of Islip goes back to William Nicholl. William Nicholl might or might not have been a relative of Richard Nichols with an S, who conquered New Netherlands from the Dutch. The historical record of that is murky. But the secretary of Richard Nichols is a man named Matthias Nicholl, and he was a relative, probably the father of William Nicholl, who came from a community in England called Islip Grange. I've been there on numerous occasions, and it's a lovely community. And if you've ever seen the movie Dr. Dolittle with Rex Harrison years ago, it looks like that community in the movie. It's a wonderful community. I've had the privilege of giving many speeches there over the years, and also staying there with the chairman of the Parish Council, or the equivalent of mayor, Claude Horrell, on numerous occasions, living in his 1609 thatched cottage. It was a wonderful experience. I loved him very much. He was a wonderful man, he and his wife and his children, great people. He lived with me when he used to come to Iceland over the years when I was town supervisor. So we established a very, very excellent relationship. Excuse me. William Nichol received a grant in 1683 from Charles II through James, the Duke of York, to what is basically, with exceptions, the town of Iceland today. The town of Iceland was 110 square miles. I think Nichol's grants in the area were probably about 80 square miles, with the exception of the Gibbs grant in Bayshore, the Willett grant in West Iceland, and one or two other scattered grants around the town. William Nichol has, his family had given a grant to Hauppauge, Suran-Kakama, Islip, Central Islip, Islip Terrace, East Islip, Sable, Bayport, Holbrook, all of the area that encompasses the north, the northeast, the central, and the southeast and central area of what is now the town of Iceland. And over the years, the property was sold off and different communities were formed. Now I'm getting ahead of myself, but West Islip was originally called West of Iceland because Nichol's home, he named after his home in England, Islip Grange, he called it Islip. And the remains of what we think was his first house is off of Deer Range Street, in Deer Range area in East Islip. And there's been some archaeological excavation there, which indicates that was probably where he first built the homestead in the 1600s. Nichol, as I said, set up the town of Islip. The property to the east of Islip Hamlet, which he formed, was called East of Islip. Central Islip got its name because it was the center of his land grant. Interestingly enough, of all the 110 square miles of Islip town today, the only area that nobody got was what is now Brentwood. And yet Brentwood plays a major role in the town of Islip because under the name of Thompson's Landing, it was the furthest east of the original railroad that was built in the center of Long Island. The original railroad stopped at Deer Park in the early 1840s and was then extended to Brentwood under the name Thompson's Landing. It was called Thompson's Landing because Isaac Thompson, who was the owner of Sacred Coast Manor in Bayshore, used to get his mail by driving up to what was then called Thompson's Landing to get the mail from the postmaster Frederick Weeks, or Wicks, depending on how you pronounce his name. And in the history of the town of Islip, you'll see it all the roads, the original families. In West Islip, Higby Lane, Willits, Udall, original families. In Hauppauge, Wheeler, original family. In the Sable Bayport area, Snedeker, also in West Islip, Snedeker, the original family. It's all over the place. You'll see the original family names in the town of Islip. So the road was called Thompson's Landing, which is now, I think, Fifth Avenue. And the road was, Thompson used this road to get his mail, et cetera, and to connect with New York City. In 1870, by 1870, with the fact that the Southerly Railroad, or what is now the Long Island Railroad, was completed to Bayshore, there was no more need, actually that was in 1852, there was no more need for Thompson to go to the Middle Island, middle tracks to get his mail. So Brentwood sort of withered on the vine at that point, and his name did not become Brentwood until 1870, with the death of Frederick Wicks. Now, in between the time of the settlement of Thompson's Landing and 1870, there was an effort to form a community here in Brentwood called Modern Times, and I'm sure you all know that, by John Humphrey Noyes, who eventually moved from here because of basically the lack of any support, and went up to Oneida County in upstate New York, and the United Silver Company, et cetera, comes from him. So the Nichol family, in setting up what is now basically the town of Islip, formed the first government in Islip in 1710. And the first supervisor of the town was a Nichol. And over the course of the last 300 years, I guess you could say, there are many nickel town supervisors, at least five. And many of the other supervisors also bear ancient names or names that tie in with the Nicol family. The first Nicols to be born here on Long Island were the sons and daughters of William Nicol, who had married a woman named Anna Van Rensselaer, another ancient name in New York State, from Albany. She was the widow of Killian Van Rensselaer. And they had any number of children. And in those days, as you know, most children died at birth, or died of diphtheria or something. And as a result of that, we were lucky to have too many children survive, and that is why people had so many children, I presume. So one of his, William Nicol's sisters, married a man named Richard Floyd, and moved to St. George and Mastic, and were the ancestors of William Floyd, who signed the Declaration of Independence. And there are some people running around in the county over the years named Nicol Floyd. Another one of the Nicols moved to Shelter Island, and that was the son of William Jr. He moved to Shelter Island because his father owned basically 2/3 of Shelter Island. And the only family I can find in the history of the state of New York that actually founded two towns in the state of New York was the Nicol family, who founded Islip and founded Shelter Island. And I recently was on Shelter Island because there's a place in Shelter Island called Neshomic, which is the original home of the Nicol family, and which has been preserved on hundreds of acres. And it's a marvelous place, and I recommend everybody who wants to see it goes to visit it because it belongs to the Nature Conservancy and is preserved in perpetuity. Now, through the Nicol family, as I said, this whole area was developed. Sable eventually became a community founded by people who brought from the Nicol family, as did every other community in the town of Islip. Now, the Nicols did so much to found Islip town, except for the Brentwood area, which was not controlled by anybody until people whose names are sometimes lost in history actually acquired land from the Indians and made it their own in Brentwood. But except for that, the Nicols basically owned everything else, almost everything else. And over the years, the Nicols developed a strong family connection with Islip and in Suffolk County. Now, turning ahead to 1776, the records of the town of Islip from 1776 to 1783 will refer to, from 1776, in this, the 16th year of the reign of His Glorious Majesty King George III. And that continues through to 1783, where it would be in the 23rd year of the reign of His Great Majesty George III. On the beginning of the town board meeting in April of 1784, the records indicate in this the first year of American independence. Now, the reason why they switched was because the Nicols backed the King during the American Revolution. They were against the Revolution. And they paid dearly for it. Their lands were eventually seized and sold at auction by order of Governor Clinton, George Clinton of the state of New York, who was governor from 1777 to 1795, and again from 1801 to 1804. He ordered the seizure and sale of the lands. And Nicol begged the commissioners who were in charge of the land sales, to protect his interest, because one of them was William Floyd, whose house had been burned down and his family had been badly treated by the British. One was a man named Lamadou, who was the first congressman from Long Island, from Southold. His son was shot dead at his own family door by a British officer when he opened the door. And another was a man named Robert Townsend, who might or might not have been the origin of James Fenimore Cooper's famous book, The Spy, John Birch. His family was also mistreated by the Brits. So they were not going to give any truck to William Nicol. The Nicol family paid the price. But as recently as 30 years ago, there were still Nicols living here on Long Island in Bayport. The Lancey Nicol and I were socially connected. We knew each other. And he was a wonderful person before he moved to Hanover, New Hampshire. Very, very, very fine man. So the Nicols roots stayed here in Suffolk County. But with the spin-off of the land, the Nicol name, while remembered in streets, Road, well, remembered in points of the bay, Nichols Point, Nichols Bay, etc. The Nichols themselves, the name of the family, basically disappeared. But the Floyd name is still extant, and the names of many other of the original families are still extant. And if you go to St. John's Episcopal Church in Oakdale, which is the second oldest church on Long Island, the graveyard there is replete with the names of people who are connected with the Nicholl family, like Admiral Ludlow, who was a hero of War of 1812. So we still have a number of roots involving the Nicholl family and the history of the town of Islip. And we have a great history here in the town of Islip. It's one of the oldest towns in the state of New York. It's a major English settlement, and it has a lot of charm to it. And the people who moved in over the years, all of us have the duty to pass on to them what we know about the past history of our town.